March 3rd, 1943, 10:15 hours. Bismarck Sea, 30 nautical miles northwest of Lae, New Guinea. The oil-blackened hand trembled as a Japanese naval officer gripped the splintered remains of what had once been part of the destroyer Arashio's bridge structure, his uniform soaked with fuel oil and seawater, recording in his mind words that would haunt him for the remainder of his life. Through salt-burned eyes, he watched American B-25 Mitchell bombers circle back over the debris field that stretched for miles across the Bismarck Sea. Oil slicks, burning wreckage, and thousands of men desperately clinging to anything that would float. The convoy that had departed Rabaul with such confidence just 2 days earlier was now nothing more than flotsam, and the survivors were about to discover that their ordeal was far from over. 6,900 soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army's 51st Division had boarded 8 transport ships at Simpson Harbour, Rabaul on February 28th, convinced they would reinforce Lae and turn the tide in New Guinea. What they encountered instead would shatter every conception of warfare they had been taught, every notion of honour between enemies, and every assumption about American military conduct that Japanese propaganda had instilled in them. The planning had begun in late December 1942 at Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo. Lieutenant General Hitoshi Imamura, commanding the 8th Area Army at Rabaul, faced an increasingly desperate situation in New Guinea. The Japanese convoy was a result of a Japanese Imperial General Headquarters decision in December 1942 to reinforce their position in the Southwest Pacific. The convoy would consist of 8 destroyers escorting 8 transport ships carrying the main body of the 51st Division, elite troops transferred from China. On 28 February 1943, the convoy, comprising 8 destroyers and 8 troop transports with an escort of approximately 100 fighter aircraft, set out from Simpson Harbour in Rabaul. The convoy commander, Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, flew his flag from the destroyer Shirayuki. A veteran of numerous successful convoy operations, Kimura understood the risks. The 18th Army staff held war games that predicted losses of 4 out of 10 transports and between 30 and 40 aircraft. They gave the operation only a 50-50 chance of success. March 1st, 1943. As the convoy rounded the northern coast of New Britain, the first American reconnaissance aircraft appeared, a B-24 Liberator from the 91st Bombardment Group. What the Japanese didn't know was that their every move had been anticipated. The Allies had detected preparations for the convoy, and naval codebreakers in Melbourne, FRUMEL, and Washington, D.C. had decrypted and translated messages indicating the convoy's intended destination and date of arrival. At 5th Air Force Headquarters, General George Kenney received the news he had been waiting for. For months, his air crews had been perfecting a revolutionary technique. Skip bombing was a low-level bombing technique independently developed by several of the combatant nations in World War II, notably Italy, Australia, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. It allows an aircraft to attack shipping by skipping the bomb across the water like a stone. Major Paul Pappy Gunn had modified B-25 Mitchell bombers, installing up to 8 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns in the nose. Combined with skip bombing techniques, these flying gunships could devastate shipping at close range. Dawn broke grey and overcast on March 2nd. At 1000 hours, the clouds parted. 29 B-17 flying fortresses appeared at high altitude. When a force of 29 B-17s hit the convoy, a large merchant vessel was sunk, 2 others damaged, and a destroyer was set on fire. The first victim was the Kyokusei Maru, carrying 1,500 troops and drums of aviation fuel. B-17 pilots reported seeing the transport Kyokusei Maru breaking in half and sinking. The 5,493-ton transport exploded in a fireball visible from every ship in the convoy. The destroyers Asagumo and Yukikaze immediately moved in to rescue survivors, pulling oil-soaked men from the water. This act of humanity would soon prove tactically dangerous as they had to reduce speed. The morning of March 3rd dawned clear, perfect flying weather. The convoy, now reduced to 7 transports and 8 destroyers, had covered nearly 2/3 of the distance to Leh. At 1000 hours, death arrived from multiple directions. All of the Japanese plans fell apart, however, at 10 a.m. on March 3rd, 1943, in the Bismarck Sea just off the New Guinea coast from Leh. In the span of about 15 minutes, the Japanese lost World War II. First came B-17 at high altitude, drawing Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns skyward. Then, while everyone was looking up, 13 Australian Beaufighters swept in at mast height, their 8 forward-firing guns raking the decks. Behind them came the modified B-25s, approaching so low their prop wash left wakes on the water. The skip bombing technique proved devastatingly effective. The bombs would skip over the surface of the water in a manner similar to stone skipping and either bounce into the side of the ship and detonate, or submerge and explode next to the ship. Captain Ed Larner, leading the 90th Squadron's modified B-25s, approached the transport Teio Maru at wave height. His forward guns silenced the ship's anti-aircraft positions. The bombs released from Larner's B-25 skipped twice across the water before slamming into the Teio Maru's hull at the waterline. The 6,870-ton transport broke in half and sank within minutes. By 10:15, 15 minutes after the initial attack, all 7 transports had been hit and some were sinking. 3 of their destroyer escorts had also been badly damaged or had already sunk. The destroyer Shirayuki, Admiral Kimura's flagship, took a direct hit that detonated her forward magazine. She disappeared in a massive explosion. By noon on March 3rd, the Bismarck Sea had become a hellscape. Oil fires burned across the surface. The water, thick with bunker fuel, was littered with debris and thousands of men, soldiers who couldn't swim, exhausted sailors, wounded clinging to wreckage. Conservative estimates placed over 3,000 men in the water. The 4 surviving destroyers, Yukikaze, Asagumo, Uranami and Shikinami, began rescue operations. Some 2,700 survivors were taken to Rabaul by the destroyers, but they could only do so much before Allied aircraft returned. At 1400 hours on March 3rd, the American planes returned with a different purpose. The survivors watched with initial relief as aircraft approached. Surely they were photographing the destruction. That relief turned to horror as the planes descended to wave height and opened fire. In a controversial move, Allies patrolled the waters for several days, strafing survivors in lifeboats. This was later justified as necessary to prevent the enemy from coming ashore. B-25s, A-20 Havocs, and Beaufighters made repeated passes, their machine guns churning the water into foam. The tactical justification was clear from the American perspective. These were enemy soldiers who, if they reached shore, would reinforce the Japanese garrison at Leh. As for the strafing of Japanese survivors in the water, they did it keep them from reaching shore and becoming part of the Japanese forces. General Kenney's orders were explicit. No Japanese soldier was to reach New Guinea alive. For the Japanese in the water, this violated every concept of honourable warfare. The Bushido Code spoke of treating defeated enemies with dignity. What they experienced shattered these assumptions completely. As darkness fell on March 3rd, American PT boats entered the area. That night, a force of 10 U.S. Navy PT boats, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Barry Atkins, set out to attack the convoy. The PT boats systematically hunted survivors through the night. Their searchlights swept across the water, followed by machine gun fire. PT-143 and PT-150 found the damaged transport Oigawa Maru still afloat and torpedoed it, sending more men into the water. For the Japanese survivors, the night brought additional horrors. Sharks, drawn by blood and distressed movements, began attacking. Men who had survived the sinking and strafing now faced death from below. Dawn on March 4th revealed the full scope of the disaster. The debris field stretched for 40 miles. Small groups of survivors still dotted the sea, many having spent over 20 hours in the water. The American aircraft returned with the sunrise. On March 4th, the Allies sent torpedo boats and aircraft to patrol the area. They strafed Japanese survivors and rescue vessels. B-25s, A-20s, Beaufighters, and P-38 Lightning fighters systematically attacked anything that moved. The destroyer Asashio, which had remained behind to rescue